Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are going to be looking at Unit 1, Session 2 for June 12th, which is Wisdom as a Gift of the Spirit. And the scripture text for this week's lesson is 1 Corinthians 2, verses 10 through 16. I'm Rachelle Lyndaker Schlabach. I'm one of the co-pastors at Millersburg Mennonite Church.
And my name is Ron Tinsley, otherwise known as Pastor T. I'm the pastor of outreach, one of the pastors at Oxford Circle Mennonite Church in Philadelphia.
So thanks for joining us today as we take a look at this lesson. One of the things that comes to mind is that there's a focus here on truth and wisdom. And in the participant guide, it says the purpose of receiving the Spirit is to discern, to judge what is true and what is not. And it strikes me that in today's world, there is so much that is presented as true or fact and is actually opinion and may or may not be true. And also a lot of things that present themselves as Christian and may or may not actually be Christian. So there's so much opportunity and need for people in our churches to be accessing the spirit of wisdom to help them discern. I think there's a lot that you could invite your class members to dive into as they take a look at this scripture text.
And thanks for sharing that, Rachelle. One of the things that I think about with wisdom is I always think of the book of Proverbs. And as I think about the book of Proverbs, it talks a lot about wisdom. And we also see in the New Testament, as we look at 1 Corinthians, we see it talks about the wisdom of the Spirit and how there's a difference between human wisdom and godly wisdom. And wisdom of the Spirit distinguishes and leads to a deeper understanding, as you were saying, whereas human wisdom leads to understandings with humankind at the center, with our wisdom and our knowledge at the center of it, and it basically pushes God out the center. And as Christians, we need to be on guard against human wisdom that often can sometimes masquerade as also godly wisdom in our everyday lives, in our entertainment, and whatever the things that we're taking in through media. It's important for us to seek God, and God says that He gives generously to those who ask, when we ask for wisdom. So we need to make sure we understand the difference between the two, where when godly wisdom's at the center, it leads us to think more about the virtues of God and God's character, as opposed to placing ourselves at the center and making ourselves the center of the story or the center of the truths and facts that are coming out. And so, as we think about it, I think it'd be good too to study the book of Proverbs along with 1 Corinthians, so that you can see the connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Yeah, that would be really good background to bring in. Thanks for that suggestion. Another way that I wonder about maybe helping class members to experience this text, it's the sort of text where there are some pretty deep ideas being discussed, ones that maybe challenge even our own human understanding. And I wonder about a couple of different ways of helping people experience it. One might actually be sort of a Lectio Divina style prayerful reading, where you as the teacher or maybe someone else in the class reads it through slowly once or twice and just invite people to listen and maybe call aloud a phrase or a word that stands out to them. That might be an interesting way to help people experience and kind of soak in the words of this passage, or to take more of a Bible study approach to it, perhaps, would be to look at the Corinthian context somewhat. I think so often we assume that the words in scripture were written to people who were very different from us in a very different time, a very different place. And while it's certainly true that there is that gap of time and geography, there are so many ways in which there are similarities, I think, to the Corinthian context. If you think about the fact that there were theological divisions among them, there were gaps between the rich and the poor, there was this religious pluralism surrounding the church in Corinth. So many ways in which I think our context today actually mirrors some of that. And that might be something that you could explore as the teacher as well with your class.
Yeah, I echo that as well, Rachelle. As you talk about specific types of readings, one of the things that strikes me when you said that is, one of the things I think of wisdom is, I believe wisdom also has a way of slowing things down, especially in the world today where our world is moving very fast and quickly. Just as we pursue the spirit, and pursuing the spirit can take time to understand what God is up to, it's important for us to recognize that seeking God's wisdom also takes time, and that there are different people within our community that can be at different levels of it, and they can be experiencing life very differently, to the point where they see the wisdom differently, or they may not be experiencing it at the same level as the next person. I believe in those cases, we must gently instruct and be prepared, even at the extreme, to challenge and discipline if necessary. I know we don't like that word, but part of the reason for that is because we live in a fast-paced world that doesn't want us to stop to ask the questions that need to be asked. And when we don't ask the questions when we don't take time to ask the question, that means that we're not taking the time to really think outside of ourselves about what is the wisdom of God saying? How do we protect the integrity of it in this community amongst the factions and the divisions that exist? One of the things that always strikes me about the New Testament when I talk to different people is they'll look at the church and say, well, the church has so many problems. And my first question will be, have you read the New Testament? Have you read Paul's letters where he's responding to the different types of ideas that are filtering into his churches, which is prompting their questions to him? So we can see that these questions that are coming out, they're questions coming out about, well, what is godly wisdom? What is human wisdom? How do we apply it in life? How is this a gift of the Spirit? So those are the kind of questions that can lead to some growth, some spiritual growth within the community.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And one of the spiritual practices that this lesson actually suggests is leading the class through a time of meditation, which I think is worth considering doing. That's something that maybe for some people in your class might be a very comfortable thing, might be something they do on a regular basis. And for others, it might feel completely new and foreign. So it'd be good to lead them through it, so that it doesn't feel so daunting. The lesson, I think, suggests maybe doing the time of meditation right at the end, and that would be an option, but you might also want to consider, as the teacher, moving it up earlier in the class time so that there can be more of a time to debrief. How did they feel? How did they experience this time of meditation? Or to even encourage class members perhaps to try it for a block of time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe even 20 minutes at home sometime during the week. And then the following Sunday, you could ask them to reflect on that. That would be an interesting thing to try out as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Meditation is talked about in the larger culture, but oftentimes in the speed of how things are happening, it's practiced a little bit what I would call in a vacuum. In other words, it's used when things seem to be out of control, when the whole idea of solitude meditation is also supposed to be a way of life. And you see that all throughout church history, where you have the monks, the monastic movement, in various different ways. And then we have it also in smaller situations and examples, such as when Jesus goes and he spends time with the Father. It's important for us to think deeply about these things, because many of the things that look like they're on the surface are actually spiritual issues. And I know in the world we live in today, as our world becomes more materialistic, it's thinking less about those kind of things. At the same time, there is an acknowledgement there that there may be more out there. So that gives us an opportunity to make sure that we are being humble and displaying God's wisdom, even amongst people who may have different ideas of what it is. And it also helps for us to, as we commune with the Father, that we understand the times that we're living in. And that's why it's important for us to slow down and to stop and to find time to allow God to speak into our lives, allow us to even talk together as a community about What do we hear God's Spirit saying? What is his wisdom asking us to embrace? Or what is his wisdom asking us to do or not do? I think these kind of things are important. So do you have any last words, Rachelle?
No, I just love that idea actually of corporate listening. I think we often think of listening as an individualistic thing, but there's something powerful about doing it in a group and then having the chance to discuss with one another in the community what we are hearing from God. So yeah, thank you for that.
Well, this is great. Thanks for sharing, Rachelle. This was a good time. So this was lesson 2, the wisdom as a gift of the Spirit. So we hope that you guys will find this a fruitful discussion. Thank you.